we've got to yank liberalism back, because liberalism is now becoming dictatorial. That's what it is. It's dictatorship. You will accept these extreme ideologies or we will lock you up. And we've got to be brave and speak out about them, about these extreme ideologies, and not let the uber liberal crowd shut us down. And I
That's
want them, if they want to arrest me, come and arrest me. That's what I say. Come and do it.
your story is pretty fascinating because you've got certain stances which I relate to, and we're going to get through it and really maybe dig into the nuances of your stance. But also knowing your background makes it even more interesting because you were born, from what I understand, in Pakistan, and
Correct.
and then you are critical of certain aspects of the British society and immigration policy in the UK. So, in my opinion, it kind of puts you in a better position than most to have that stance. Of how I see it, considering you come from that background. It's like, for me, I'm an immigrant to Australia. So when I'm critical of immigration in Australia, I believe it holds more weight because I am an immigrant. So I'm kind of criticizing my position in a way. But I'd like
Yeah.
to get maybe a general overview of for people outside the UK, they're hearing all these issues about censorship, immigration, the grooming gangs. What are the biggest obstacles or the biggest issues that the UK faces moving away from the noise? What concerns you the most right now in the UK?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that the ailments that are afflicting the United Kingdom are ailments that are commonly afflicting Western civilization. And in Western civilization, I include Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. And the basic ailment is one of wrestling between the balance between liberalism and democracy. And, you would have heard it said that the United Kingdom is a liberal democracy. European countries are liberal democracies. Um, and there is a healthy, or there should be a healthy tension between the liberal side of our form of governance and the democratic side of our form of governance. Liberalism is about championing of individual rights, and democracy is about championing the majority's interest. But the equation's gone wrong. In the pursuit of protecting individuals and minorities, our governance systems have become uber sensitive, uber controlling, to ensure that there isn't what they call dictatorship by the majority. And and so the balance has gone wrong in Western civilization. There's also another force at play, which is this inclination of our, the establishment across Western Europe, the United States, and Western civilization, to govern through the global prism. What's better for the globe as opposed to what's better for their nation. And I think if I were to put an optimistic gloss on it, the reason they do that is they think if the world is doing well, the West will do well. But of course, in the pursuit of that global aspiration, they've effectively set aside the interests of their nation states and their own people. And when you combine the uber form of liberalism that we've got, it's almost toxic. It is toxic, actually, the form of liberalism we've got, with the globalism that's infecting us, what I call the liberal global order. We are seeing a complete destruction of Western civilization. Does that make sense?
It does. That's a fascinating way of putting it because I think that encompasses not just what's happening in the UK, but as you said, the Western world and many European countries that we're seeing. Could you just explain that a bit further on more? How did we get here? Like, is it coming from good intentions? What Dr. Gadsad, Professor Gadsad said, it was um, suicidal empathy, and that was the term he used,
Yeah,
and he uses it all the time.
which is liberalism gone mad, suicidal empathy. And but so I think the origins of it lie with very good intentions. The origins of globalization really were born out of the aftermath of World War II and a desire by the great nation states of the world, for there not to be another war. So institutions like the United Nations, the European Convention of Human Rights with its associated European Court of Human Rights, the seeds of the European Union, all of these things were sown in the aftermath of World War II with a desire for cooperation on the global stage, make sure nothing like this could ever happen again. But progressively over the decades, the various institutions that have been set up to pursue global prosperity and global peace have become much more powerful than they should be, frankly. And we often hear it said in the United Kingdom that we can't do X, Y, and Z because we're prohibited under international law, or we can't do this because the EU prohibits it, or the World Bank would look poorly on it, or the IMF will criticize our economic policy, so we can't do that. And we're sacrificing what's in the interests of our countries now in order to comply with our so-called global obligations. And that is very, very dangerous. And perhaps one of the best examples of the two really good examples of it, the tilt towards net zero, where in order to prevent apparently the entire globe burning up, we in the United Kingdom are having to sacrifice our economic prosperity. We can't afford net zero in the United Kingdom. We don't have the renewable energies available to replace fossil fuels in the way that they would need to in order for us to be prosperous. And we're literally sacrificing our economy for this apparent global aim of getting to net zero by 2050. That's one very good example. And I think the other really good example is mass migration. If you stand for the betterment of the globe, frankly, it doesn't matter who is in your country, because you regard all humanity as having exactly the same the same privileges, the same rights. And you forget that your own citizens in your country should be the ones that you have your primary obligation to. So mass migration, this economic emasculation on the altar of net zero, are two very good examples of where globalism has gone wrong. And then when you combine that with liberalism, the protection of minorities, if you have vast numbers of people coming into your country, as we have done in the United Kingdom, from different cultures, some cultures antipathetic, and many of them, holding, in fact, the United Kingdom in contempt. But if you import people like that, and then in the pursuit of liberalism, you put a protective blanket around them and say, we're going to protect you. You can come to our country. Your culture is perfectly valid. We accept your culture. We celebrate your culture. In fact, we'll set our own culture back. We'll take the knee to your culture, and we'll make sure you get jobs and so on and so forth. And we have come to know what this is now termed diversity, equity, and inclusion. And actually, it's extremely divisive. It's not equal, and it's certainly diverse, but I would say it's more division rather than diverse, if you're with me. And so multiculturalism is the mass immigration, mass migration of people into your own country, coupled with this protective blanket that DEI gives them, has created significant divisions in the United Kingdom and again across Europe and in the United States. And so in the pursuit, I think, of what started with honorable ambitions, global prosperity, making sure everyone had a fair shake of the dice, as it were, in life, we've gone too far. We've set aside our democracies. We've set aside our own people's interests. We're setting aside the nation states, the great nation states of the world.
Okay. I like the way you're explaining this. Because a lot of people try to look at it as good versus evil, and this is the evil thing to do, and this is the right thing to do. But I think, something could start, could come from a good place, but then the pendulum could swing too far. And I think this is what we're seeing in a lot of the world.
Yeah.
I'm
glad you use the analogy of a pendulum. It is about a pendulum. We need to yank the pendulum back to the right position.
Yeah, and you've always got the worry, will it yank too far to the other side? And that happens all the time, because I think it's what Elon explained it well. Like, the left went too far in the US. It's like he's had this. He had a very famous meme that he posted. He's in the same position, but the left just went away too far. The pendulum swung too far away from him.
Yeah.
And then he's closer to the right. The left was here, but he's closer to the right now because the left just moved way too extreme. Because the way I see it, and I tend to oversimplify things, is they just when they have too much power, they do get carried away with it. But one thing I don't get, and I think that applies to both sides. One thing I don't understand though is immigration, and that's something that just it doesn't click. I get different people explaining it in different ways. Mass migration is really backfiring on the ruling political class right now. Yet they're still maintaining those same positions. Why is that if it's costing them votes? Like, I'm sure they're seeing that this is harming them. In the US, the explanation was they're trying to bring in, citizens to get votes. That was the main reason. Plus, they're
Yeah.
good for the economy. In Spain, you saw that economically I've got some good numbers here that
Yeah.
economically is a good explanation for it. But wouldn't politicians always choose what their voters want so they remain in power? And if their voters are tired of that immigration, wouldn't that be a bigger focus of theirs than long-term benefits to the economy, if that even applies?
So, I mean, a number of points to address there, if I
Yes,
may. So, the first
take your
one is
time.
quite interesting. I had lunch with a senior member of the Conservative Party literally a couple of months ago, and his view was, believe it or not, that if they can get the right economic policies, they'll win the next election. They've completely misunderstood that the salient issue politically and in the electorate's mind at the moment is not the economy, as important as the economy is. The salient issue is the culture of the United Kingdom, the effect that mass migration is having on our country, the setting aside of what it means to be British. The Conservative Party in this country hasn't even learned that lesson yet, even though it should be self-evident to any political commentator, viewer, anyone participating in politics. So our politicians haven't got to understand that that is the issue. They still think banging the drum against mass migration is the preserve of a minority of politicians on the far right, on the so-called far right, who keep banging that. They haven't really learned that lesson. But I think there's another reason as well, Mario, and it's this, that the ideological hijacking of those that govern us is deep. And they have signed us into treaties and into international institutions, which make it virtually impossible without huge political fortitude to change the direction of travel of this train. This train is on a track and it's moving at high speed. And the courage and vision and execution ability required, for example, to lead the European Convention of Human Rights is big. We would have to stand up to all of Europe. The United Kingdom would have to stand up to Europe and the European Union and say, we are leaving and we don't care what you do. And if you cut up rough with us, we will cut up rough with you. We have to have a Trumpian approach to resetting the direction of travel of this train. And our politicians haven't got there yet, as bizarre as that might sound.
Mm. Going back to the immigration issue, how? Like, just looking at it from the outside, the most common name this year, and I think previous years as well, is Muhammad for children, for boys being born. That's now I've got very close. Hold on, you're Pakistani, you're born Muslim. I've got one of my best friends is Pakistani. Sorry, you're born in Pakistan, you're British. My apologies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to choose my words carefully. My apologies. But I
Yeah.
have friends that are Muslim, and one of them is Pakistani. Very close friends that are Muslim. When I mention
Yeah.
that fact to them, I tell them like, "Hey, the most common name in the UK is Muhammad." They look at me in shock. I'm like, "Okay, that," and they're Muslim, and they say,
Yeah.
but they go. Their eyes like, "We go to the UK for the UK." Like,
Yeah.
that's not what we imagine when you think of Great Britain or any European country. Um, how come politicians are not coming around to this fact?
They just haven't come around. Can I just say a couple of things about me, just quickly,
Please.
since you mentioned my
Of
past?
course, yeah, please. And I'd love to dig into that part.
Yeah.
I think it's a fascinating one too.
So my father's Pakistani and my mother is English. My dad was born in Punjab. My mother was born in Isleworth near Heathrow Airport. So I am half Pakistani and half English. I was born
You were born,
in
yes.
Karachi, in Pakistan, 1965. And I went to Karachi Grammar School, which was a school set up by the British when they were there. And my life as a child in Karachi was what I would say was an idyllic childhood. And I grew up with the tailwinds of British Imperial India behind us. Karachi was a very peaceful city back in those days. It had a very small population. The streets were wide. The trees, I don't know if you're aware of this, Mario, but in the subcontinent, the British used to paint the trees white for the first 3 feet and then with a red band. All the trees in Karachi had that paint on them. It was most spectacular vision. and the buildings were all first class leftover, from the empire and so on. And so I grew up believing completely in the United Kingdom in the way that you just described some of your friends regarding the UK. Is we go to the UK because of the UK. We don't go there because we want it to be another Muslim state. And all my peer group in Pakistan were of the same mind. Everyone looked to the United Kingdom with love and with of you know the revisionist history of the empire having been a bad thing. That is, as I say, revisionist history. I lived through post-imperial India, Pakistan in my case, and there was no animosity towards the British in Pakistan. There was a love towards the British. The exit, from as violent as the exit was in 1947, actually the affiliation with the United Kingdom was strong. And and then I left for boarding school in 1979. I came to the United Kingdom. I went to rugby school. Then I went to Cambridge University. I worked in the city. And I had a very, very British lifestyle, a very English upbringing. And of course, I went to school at a time when we were taught to be proud of our country. We were taught to be proud of how we developed our empire, which, by the way, was not by design. It came by accident. We developed an empire by accident because we were just pretty cool people. We had the agrarian revolution, we had the industrial revolution, we had a form of law that lent itself to being able to, foster international trade and so on and so forth. And so I grew up thinking that the United Kingdom may not be the most powerful country anymore in the world, but it's still the best country in the world. And I also was entirely complacent about our position in the world. I never thought that our politicians would practice the kind of extreme policies that they're now practicing, that would set our country aside, that could actually undermine our very existence. And so, even though I was born in Pakistan, I'm completely British, if you know what I mean. And yeah, and so it's been when I got re-engaged with politics, well, not re-engaged, when I first got engaged with politics, um, I didn't realize that so much had changed in the British political landscape. I didn't realize that our establishment was so against us. I spent my life in business, making money for my family, bringing my children up, and so on. And my political journey has been a bit like peeling back an onion. I could see that something was wrong with our political class when they wouldn't deliver the vote to leave the European Union. They haven't delivered it yet. Whatever they say, we're still hooked at the hip with the EU, and we've left Northern Ireland behind and so on. And that was my first entry into politics. But as I've peeled it back, I've realized this infection that we've got from the liberal global order and how that's playing against the United Kingdom, and how effectively we've created this situation where Mohammed is the first name in the UK. And we've got to restore the United Kingdom back to its former glorious position. We've got to do it. We've got to do it for the world. I know I've just decried globalism, but actually the globe was a much healthier, better place when the United Kingdom was a stable, proud, prosperous country. And we've got to get back to that position.
Would you say globalism helped other countries, third world countries or less fortunate countries, at the expense of countries like the UK? So when you look at net of the planet, maybe it's had a net benefit. But when you look at the UK, and obviously your focus is the British people, that's what you should focus on, not the world. The
Yeah.
benefit wasn't there.
Yeah, no doubt.
Because the benefit is it? Sorry, not wasn't there. Sorry to interrupt, but the benefit is no longer there because it's gone too far, as we said earlier.
Yeah, so no doubt global trade at a particular level is healthy. You can't bring countries like Pakistan out of poverty through aid. You can't do it. That just creates a dependency culture. The only way to do it is through trade. So if we want a prosperous world, a peaceful world, we do have to trade with each other. But we've gone too far. I mean, for example, I think the US wants to impose sanctions on India. By the way, Trump has got this right. People criticize Trump for his desire to impose tariffs, but global trade's gone too far. it is denuding the United States of America of its productive ability. In the United Kingdom, we've got even much further. We have deindustrialized the United Kingdom. We have destroyed large swathes of our economy on the back of global trade. And to give you a really good example, Trump wants to impose tariffs on India because it's importing cheap Russian oil. It has different standards to the US and so on and so forth. And he wants to impose tariffs on India, not sanctions, tariffs. We have just signed a free trade deal with India. Now, that they're polar opposite policies. If you want to impose tariffs, what you're saying is India has an uncompetitive advantage and we need to correct that imbalance. And I believe Trump's got it right taking that approach. In the UK, we've gone the other way and we said, well, we want to embrace India. And we've got a free trade deal, which is basically going to mean India is going to take the UK to the cleaners because it's got cheaper energy, it's got lesser employment protections, lesser human rights, lesser regulatory framework, smaller taxes, etc., etc., etc. And it comes from a completely unfair, it's a completely unfair trade with India. But we're so stupid in the UK that our Prime Minister signed this trade deal and he champions it and celebrates it like it's some kind of achievement. Literally, he's denuded the United Kingdom even further. And we've got to correct that imbalance. So yes, globalism to some extent, of course, has benefited other countries, and so it should. But it's got to be mutual. It can't be to the destruction of your own nation state, which is where we're heading.
I want to go back to your background and what your stances are today. Again, it's just a fascinating position that you're in. Tommy's concern, actually, there's a statement that Tommy made in our interview that surprised me that I didn't agree with that one, but maybe
Yeah.
he would. And maybe he has a point. Like, I haven't looked into the numbers. Maybe he has. He said that he has friends that are Muslim, but he said, Mario, Islam as a religion is one that is not good at assimilating. And he's seen that, he's given a lot of examples of it. Now, I wasn't born Muslim. I don't have a Muslim family, so I'm not too familiar in that world. But when I migrated to Australia, I was in a village in the Australian towns, all Australians. So I haven't really witnessed it. And I've looked at the numbers. Would you agree with that statement that Islam as a religion is not the best at assimilating? Because you're a great example of the opposite. And
So
also
one of the
maybe
things,
add to it as well, if you have similar concerns when it comes to assimilation.
so one of the things I should have said when I described my upbringing was that when I was born in Karachi in 1965 and I left in 1979, that period, Islam was basically going through what I would call a period of enlightenment in that period. And if you look at black and white photographs from Iran, from Iraq, Lebanon, any part of the Middle East, including Pakistan, all the women were wearing, or not all the women, but a large number of women were wearing dresses. They had their hair free flowing, and they looked just like Western women of that era. And Islam in the 1980s, and again, I didn't witness this because I'd already left Pakistan, but Islam in the 1980s became much more fundamentalist. There was an exportation, I think, from Saudi, deliberately exportation of a Wahhabi, Salafi kind of form of Islam, a more purist form of Islam. Now, one of the issues that Islam has is that it is prone to fundamentalism. And the reason I believe it's prone to fundamentalism is that the Quran is the word of God as dictated to the Prophet Muhammad through the angel Gabriel. And if your holy book is literally the word of God, it is incapable of being debated. It's incapable of being interpreted in any way other than literally, because it is pure. It is the truth. It is God. And if you can't debate your religion, effectively, if you can't debate your ideology, it is at odds with our Western way, because in the West, we debate everything. And one of the strengths of our form of Christianity has been it's vacated governance. I think, again, it's gone too far, and we can talk about Christianity in the United Kingdom, but Islam won't tolerate debate. That's why we see Muslim MPs in the House of Commons now demanding that there are laws against blaspheming against the Abrahamic scripture. Basically, that's cover for trying to get Islamophobia laws embedded in the UK. And to some extent, we've already got blasphemy laws coming into the UK through the back door, appeasing people like that. And I think we're going to talk about freedom of speech. One of the reasons
Yes,
freedom of
big
speech
topic.
is, yeah, I mean, one of the reasons freedom of speech is being shut down is because we've got a very vocal Muslim community now who don't want Islam challenged. And the form of Islam we have in the UK is even more fundamentalist than many forms of Islam practiced in the Middle East. The United Arab Emirates has proscribed a number of British Muslim institutions as being terroristic, and we allow them to practice in the United Kingdom. We have completely lost the plot in the UK. Now, you will hear a lot of politicians, Mario, talk about the need to control extremist Islam. It's a stupid comment in my mind to talk about controlling extremist Islam, because it stands to reason that we should control any form of extremism. All forms of extremism are wrong. But the politicians haven't got the courage to actually say what they mean. When they talk about extremist Islam, what they should be talking about, and I believe is in their mind, but they haven't got the courage to say it, is that they should be challenging fundamentalist Islam. Now, they don't believe they can say that because there's no crime in being a fundamentalist. But actually, being a fundamentalist Muslim stands at odds with our liberal democracy in the United Kingdom. And just going back to that form of liberalism, this uber liberalism, we've brought in lots of Muslims to the country. I think the last census was 2021, and it put it at 4 million Muslims in a population of 68 million. Actually, the figure in my mind is much higher than that. But if you having brought those Muslims into the country, if you put a protected blanket around them and say, we recognize your right to practice your religion, we celebrate your religion, you don't have to accept our religion, we will step back and let you rule the roost, and we'll give you jobs, and we'll make sure you get first line in for housing, etc., etc., etc. What you're effectively doing is empowering fundamentalist Islam in the United Kingdom. You're literally empowering them. And you will see that all our institutions now have Muslim trade bodies, Muslim representatives, the police, social services. They all have a very form of muscular form of Islam in their midst. And Islam is not like Christianity. It is a proselytizing religion. It is a muscular religion. It will not have any truck with being challenged. Christianity is prepared to be challenged left, right, and center. And so, I mean, one of the best examples of it, stop me if I'm going into too much.
No, no,
Mario,
yeah. No, I'm enjoying this because I want to add a question. Like, do you still practice Islam?
I'm not. I've never been a Muslim. So let's just.
My bad.
Yeah. So my father's a Muslim, but he drank like a fish when we were children. Or I mean, alcohol. We had free-flowing alcohol in Pakistan when I was a child. It was prohibited in 1977, a couple of years before I left. And my father was absolutely furious about it. And my mother is a practicing Christian. And so we were brought up. We celebrated Eid because it was a national holiday in Pakistan, but we celebrated Easter, we celebrated Christmas, and we did it with Christmas trees, and we went to church and we sang hymns, and we went and had drinks parties and so on. So I had a very a soft Christian upbringing. And then actually I got baptized in 1994 when I was 29 so that I could marry my English wife in a church. I didn't want to go into church and do a Christian ceremony without having been baptized. I am not, however, a practicing Christian. I very rarely go to church. I love singing hymns because they're part of our national culture. One of the things I think we should be doing more of is singing hymns, because they don't just remind us of our Christian roots, they remind us of our British roots, because a lot of our hymns, as you may know, Mario, talk about our history, talk about the United Kingdom, about England, and so on. They remind us of who we are as a nation. And we don't sing hymns anymore, which I think we should. So I'd never been a Muslim. And yeah, so I don't know how I got to that point, but
No, so because you were talking about how with the question I asked you earlier is whether you have concerns with Islam assimilating in British culture. There's a point
so I
Tommy
think
Robinson made, which is a fascinating point, because you're an example of where immigration could go really well for a country. Spain is an example where it could economically go well. So where do you find that balance? What's your stance on immigration now? So first, how do you solve assuming there's a problem now in the UK, because some will disagree that even is a problem. But if you look at the grooming gang issue, which I want you to kind of talk about, and also the the fact that Muhammad is the number one name, is like, I love Islam. My best friends, I have to kind of put that disclaimer there before people kind of label me with something. Love Islam. I'm living. This is Dubai behind me.
Yeah, I thought that was Dubai. I recognized it.
Exactly. Exactly. But then I'm in Dubai. I expect Dubai. I go to Spain. I expect Spain for Spain.
Absolutely right.
And I've spent months in the UK. I remember my favorite restaurant in the UK is the it was a Japanese restaurant in a hotel. If I tell you what it is, you'd know it immediately. I can't remember the name now. And I remember last time Nobu in the exactly. Yeah. And right next to it, there's that the park there. I was there yesterday a few months
Park.
Yeah, exactly. I was there with a few months ago to see one of my business colleagues. And I was sitting there was tents there. I'm like, what are the tents there? And they started telling me what the story is and how there's people that are kind of the owner of that location kind of allowed people that are homeless, I think it was, to be able to install tents there. I'm like, but this is not the UK I knew. So
yeah, so let's just be clear. Immigration has gone wrong. Immigration.
How would you solve it? How would you solve it? Where do you draw the line? Where do you people like yourself? If people, the future person that's in the same position you from Pakistan, similar value, a similar Ben Habib that wants to come to the UK right now, should it be possible considering where the UK is? And then how do you solve the problem if there is a problem or if it has gone wrong?
So the way it's gone wrong is we've practiced mass migration. We've had no control over where these people have come from. I mean, the people you want in your country, if you're going to take immigrants in, are people who are going to contribute culturally as well as economically to your country. People who are educated and a part of effectively the first world. This is not a racially prejudiced statement. You want people who are going to contribute to your country in a positive way. We've actually gone to the depths of Pakistan, to the most backward places in Pakistan, and taken people in who've had no brush with city living, even perhaps never been to a school, and we brought them in large numbers to the United Kingdom, and we thought that somehow they're going to assimilate. How can they assimilate if we put a protected blanket around them and say, you're entitled to practice your own religion, we celebrate your religion, we will vacate that space, and we will give you jobs ahead of British people, and so on and so forth? We're practicing a form of reverse racism in the UK, where white people are set aside in the pursuit and promotion of ethnic minorities. And if in those ethnic minorities you have something muscular, like Islam, it will rule the roost. That's what will happen. And so bizarrely, even though theoretically Jews are protected by the same form of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because they're in a grouping with a very large number of Muslims, and we're seeing anti-Semitism seriously on the rise in the UK. And that's fundamentally as a result of our immigration policy coupled with DEI and the protective blanket that we put around this group of people, which is why we tolerate the hate marches, the Palestinian, they call them pro-Palestinian marches. I call them hate marches because they want to wipe Israel out. It's not.
Are we seeing anti-Islam sentiment as well in the UK based on the whole the movement that Tommy Robinson's leading and what we're seeing when it comes to grooming gangs as well, and the focus is being placed on that?
So I think
you worry about that?
Yeah, I worry about anything that's going to cause division. We've got to be very brave in identifying what the issues are, and I think any Muslim, any educated Muslim would accept and understand and agree with me that Islam poses challenges to Western liberal democracy because of its muscular, self-confident. It's almost like a muscular, it's like an adolescent who goes to the gym, really strong, and doesn't want to put up with the sensitivities of, perhaps an older, more subtle form of engagement. And so I think any Muslim, any educated Muslim would accept that there is an issue with fundamentalist Islam. That's not to say that they must give up their religion, but Islam needs to debug itself. Fundamentalism needs to go back to the enlightened form of Islam that was practiced and is practiced by many Muslims still, but was the prevalent way, when I was a child. It's got to go back to that form of practice.
Would you have the same stance when it comes to assimilating in the UK? Would you have the same stance if, like, let's say, there's an influx of Jewish immigrants or Christian immigrants? Let's say they are not assimilated, they're very extreme in their stance as well. Obviously, they exist in our religion.
Absolutely. And I think it's a huge mistake to say Muslims all bad, Hindus all fine. And the other thing I think is a big mistake to make is to just decry these new cultures which have come to the United Kingdom and not make a case for your own culture. I think where we've gone really wrong as a country is obviously through promoting and celebrating other people's cultures, but we've made no case for our own culture. And we've set aside our culture, and we need to now be much more vocal in promoting. You said it yourself, Mario. Friends of yours who come to the UK used to come and go, "Wow, we're in the UK. We love England," and we've got to remember what it is that it was about England and the United Kingdom that people love, and we've got to bang that drum. That's a much more optimistic and positive way to win the argument, and that is what I wish my new party, Advance UK, to do. And the other thing I'll just quickly mention is that we talk about our Christian cultural roots and the importance, as I've just said, of preserving and promoting them. But we are also constitutionally a Christian country. Our bishopric sit in the House of Lords. The King of England is the head of the Church of England, and so on. And we've got to remind ourselves of all of that. And we've got to re-promote our own constitutional Christianity. That too is being set aside, and we've got to get back in touch with it.
Yeah, while you're speaking, I'm just trying to kind of strawman the argument and trying to understand the other side of that argument. It's like, you wouldn't go to Saudi, for example, and try to instill Christian values there.
Absolutely, you
Saudi,
wouldn't. Yeah.
because you'd expect it to be Saudi, and same thing for
Yeah.
the UK, same thing for Israel, etc. List goes on. So I'm trying to understand the other argument. I do understand. I think you agree with me because you're an example of that. As that immigrants add a lot of value to a country. I'm an example of that as an immigrant to Australia. They can add a lot of value to a country if done right. If it doesn't go too far, I think that's your stance. Without putting words in your mouth. Now, I do want to ask you one question about the grooming gang issue. When I first read about it, I'm like, there is no. When you read something, you're like, okay, there is no way this is true. Like now, when censorship in the UK, which we'll get to later, that's also gone out of control. When I read about the grooming gang problem last year before interviewing Tommy for the first time, there was no way this is an issue. It must be over-exaggerated, numbers taken out of context. But then on went deep, I'm like, oh no,
it's disgusting. Yeah.
It's actually, Tommy's not being racist by focusing on that issue. There actually is something there potentially. Now, today I looked at it and there was a number, and it's always hard to get the right numbers and which source to trust. The 2024 Home Office data has shown that 80% of child exploitation arrests were white British men. So there's like two sides to the argument. There's some people that are saying, no, this is an issue that Pakistanis are not the majority of, and then there's numbers that Tommy mentions that no, Pakistanis are the major culprits of this issue because of.
Just give me that statistic again.
This is I read it today before the interview,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
maybe it's out of context or incorrect. 2024 Home Office data has shown that 80% of child exploitation arrests were white British men.
Yeah.
Tommy has a lot more numbers as well. You've gone deeper than obviously myself, maybe even as deep of, it's not deeper than Tommy. How big of an issue is it? Number one, or is it being taken out of proportion? And is it the majorities? Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So if you look at rapes and paedophilia one-on-one, as it were, then the breakdown across society is roughly the proportionate to the ethnicities in society. So 80% would be white in the way that you've just. That's why I wanted to just make sure I got the statistic right. But when you look at gang rapes, then it is vastly the majority is men from South Asia. And
Okay, so
for some reason,
the question is, why are they not being prosecuted? Is the concern valid that there is fear of being labeled as a racist or some other issue that is not allowed?
Well, there are two things going on here. The first is the fear of being labeled a racist because of this protective blanket that I've mentioned a few times in this interview. Diversity, equity, and inclusion puts a protective blanket around minorities in our country. And you don't want to come across as a racist. In fact, we teach our children, I'm sure you're familiar with this. We indoctrinate our children with the theory of white privilege, that if you're white, you're privileged. And if you don't recognize that privilege, you're racist. And so there's a great fear instilled by the white indigenous population, if I can call them that, in the United Kingdom. All these ideologies were not born out of Muslims, by the way, or any foreigners. These ideologies which we're practicing were born, they're all homegrown. The problem is at home. But this white privilege theory is infecting our society. There's a fear of being called racist for calling it out. And this protected blanket of DEI basically gave these people cover to do the evil things that they were doing. But there's also another reason. And the other reason, which is more inflammatory perhaps to discuss it, is that the various institutions that should have shut down this activity were themselves infected by men who were unsympathetic to these underage white girls. It was predominantly underage white girls. They saw them as trash, and many of these white girls were in care, because they come from broken families and so on. And the people who were charged with looking after them were actually perpetrating the trade. They were abusing the children that were in their care. And it is an absolutely horrific stain and blot on the United Kingdom that this ever took place in this country. And that the institutions, the police, social services, local communities, the NHS, National Health Service, didn't protect these children, these vulnerable children, didn't protect them. And it's a stain on our establishment that, having discovered what was going on, we haven't robustly thrown the book at these people. And I'm not talking about the gang rape, the rapists. No, we've thrown the book at them. We need to throw the book at all the institutions around them that have failed to do their job.
That's crazy to imagine this. Like, if this is true, it's just heartbreaking, crazy to imagine it's happening in the UK. And I just feel like that fear of being labeled something. I remember when after obviously I covered the October 7th attack and the war afterwards. And then if you criticize Israel, that you get labeled an anti-Semite by some. If you criticize, like what we're talking now when it comes to the UK, you're labeled as a racist, and the list goes on. Elon's been labeled as Hitler. Elon, out of all people, that labeling, that fear of being labeled, is just kind of leading to censorship, which could lead to. We'll use that as an opportunity to go to the next point, and probably what I consider, in my opinion. I was speaking to Congressman Jim Jordan a few days ago on his efforts in fighting this in Europe. And that's free speech. Like, I'm an advocate for free speech, being on X and supporting Elon's fight. And I saw Elon's fight in the early stages, how he's being targeted, advertisers were being cut off. I interviewed Linda Yaccarino, who was the CEO at the time, and she told me some crazy stories on how they're trying to get Elon.
I mean, Biden tried to put him out of business, didn't he?
Yeah. It was insane. It was insane. The things that are coming out now, the Twitter files as well, pre-Elon. Now, the UK is another level. Ben, I've just got some crazy stories. I literally have a title here: "Crazy Stories of Censorship in the UK." You got Graham Linham. He's a comedian in the UK. He was I don't know if he was arrested, but I think he was arrested for a couple of days or a few hours for posting something on this. Yeah, for posting something aggressive towards transgender people. Not even aggressive. It's like a photo you can smell. It was a photo of a trans right protest. He said a photo you can smell. And he was not only arrested, he was arrested for a day, whatever it was. He's banned from using X, and he's also got a gag order of not being able to talk about why he was arrested. That's a comedian. A comedian. Comedian makes pretty harsh jokes that a lot of us can't even discuss in interviews like this.
The majority of humor is at someone's expense.
Exactly. I love. I'll be honest. I love dark humor. I mean, Joe Rogan does them on his podcast all the time. But like, when you start being censored for those things, you start getting worried it's going to get out of control and start getting abused. Go back to centralization of power. You got Bernadette. She posted something where she was upset. There was a stabbing. She said people assumed it was Ali. It was an immigrant, Ali Al Sakati, and she put a comment saying, "If this is true, again, if this is true, there's a disclaimer there. If this is true, then all hell's about to break loose." That's the comment. In the heat of the moment, people post much worse things. She deleted it an hour later, and she was questioned and almost arrested. Another person, Lucy, she posted something a bit more aggressive, deleted it after 3.5 hours, and she went to jail for 3 years. Her post, just for the audience: "Mass deportation now, set fire to all these effing hotels full of the bastards for all I care. If that makes me a racist, so be it." Goes after, I think, a stabbing incident or some sort of incident.
3 little girls were killed by a second-generation Rwandan. One of them was stabbed 120 times. He tried to behead her. Can you imagine stabbing a 9-year-old girl 120 times? You've got to be some kind of bloody animal, haven't you?
So when you look at a post like this, and to go to jail for something like this, I worry. I worry to go to Pakistan. I love Pakistan. I'm supporting Imran Khan. I've interviewed him, his wife, etc. Not his wife, his sister, his sons. But I don't go there because of the military establishment is not the friendliest. So I can't go to Pakistan. I can't go to Brazil because they threatened an investigation to me and Elon. I was told by the son of the former president, that I'll be arrested in the airport, which is kind of
Really?
crazy.
Blimey.
It's a
Yeah.
democracy's in shambles right there, in that country. But I would have never thought to ever think I'll still go to the UK. I was there a couple of months ago, but I'd think twice before going there, considering I'm a free speech advocate and I post a lot of things. But when the law gets stretched to that extent, it could be abused in ways like what happened in
But this
Romania.
is, so this is what I mean about liberalism having gone too far. So in the pursuit of protecting individual rights, liberalism's gone on steroids. And now individuals' rights are absolutely enforced. Everyone must take the knee to the individual's rights, and the majority must shut up. And so, for example, transgender ideology, you have to accept that now to be acceptable within the liberal global order, even though virtually all medics I know recognize it to be a mental health issue. A man is a man biologically. They may feel a woman, but that's a mental health issue. That doesn't make them a woman. And yet we are, for example, told that transgender women, that's men who are self-identifying as women, should somehow be allowed into women's safe spaces, should be able to compete against women in sport, should be able to go into women's prisons, which is absolutely mad. And if you're going to purvey such extreme ideologies, like requiring us to believe that men who identify as women are women, or extreme ideologies like mass immigration is a good thing, even if it means your culture is being set aside, your crime figures are going through the roof and so on, you've just got to accept it, or you're going to practice other extreme ideologies like net zero, which is damaging our economy so much. The only way to get those extreme ideologies embedded and protected is by shutting down free speech. Because otherwise the majority speak out. I don't know whether you're aware, Mario, but we often refer in England, in the United Kingdom, less so now, but we used to the silent majority. And there's a reason we call them the silent majority, because from a regulatory and legislative perspective, they've been told to shut up. We've been told to shut up. In all the examples you gave, I can add one more example to it. There's a lady called Sarah White who went to Epping Hotel a few days ago, and she flew a Union flag at the Civic Council, the local council in Epping, and she was arrested for doing that, as if flying our national flag was somehow inciting violence or causing division and was breaking the peace. She was arrested under a Public Order Act because of putting up the Union flag, our national flag. So what I'm trying to say is liberalism needs a good yank back. We talked about the pendulum. We've got to yank liberalism back, because liberalism is now becoming dictatorial. That's what it is. It's dictatorship. You will accept these extreme ideologies or we will lock you up. And we've got to be brave and speak out about them, about these extreme ideologies, and not let the uber liberal crowd shut us down. And I want them, if they want to arrest me, come and arrest me. That's what I say. Come and do it.
There was a question that was asked in the debate you had on Piers Morgan. I don't think you had the opportunity to answer. It was a good question, and that was about burning the not the Quran, the American flag, the British flag. Do you think that should be some of free speech? Absolutely. If someone wants to burn the flag, I don't care which one it is. Free speech is free speech. And I'd worry about drawing any lines, even when it's ethically, or you can make an argument that, hey, this should not be said. I'm like, if you want to be free speech absolutist, fight. And that God's side made a good argument. You fight bad ideologies with good ideologies, not by censoring them. What's your stance on free speech? Where do you draw the lines?
Yeah, so I think burning the national flag is something that I would outlaw. I know I'm naturally with you in exactly what you've just said. Everyone should be able to do whatever they want. You should be able to burn the Quran or burn the Bible without being arrested. The other day, someone was arrested in the United Kingdom for burning the Quran. I don't know if you saw that. But again,
is it legal? Is it legal in the UK to burn either book, either the Quran or the Bible?
Well, basically, it was regarded as an incitement to violence. another public order act because he was doing something that was going to cause division in society. But of course, look, burning any book is offensive to me. Some of the language politicians use and other commentators use, I find offensive. It's socially unacceptable. I wouldn't use it at dinner parties. But that does not mean you go to prison for it. You know, you reveal bad arguments by allowing those arguments to come out. You don't shut them down, which is why I'm with you generally. But the one place I think we've got to draw the line, particularly in the UK now, is the burning of our national flag. And the reason I say that is because we've taken into our bosom people who hold this country in contempt. And we've got to now push back at the contempt that they feel towards our country. And there can be no more visual expression of their contempt for this wonderful country that's been so generous to them and brought them in and endowed them, given them benefits, given them a leg up on the housing ladder, given them a leg up getting a job and so on. We've got to push back against them attacking our country and optically displaying their attack by burning our Union flag. When they burn the Union flag, what they're saying is we hate the United Kingdom. And what I say to them is, this country is a wonderful country. It has taken you into its bosom. If you don't like it, you're free to leave. You're not free to burn our national flag. So I understand the notion that you should be allowed to do pretty much whatever, but I do draw the line with burning the Union flag. I find that repugnant at a national, political, constitutional level.
I think a lot of people in the UK, especially considering where the UK is today, a lot of people would agree with your stance.
Can I just say one more thing, Mario? You said a very, very sensible thing, if I may say so, at the outset, when you said, got to be careful the pendulum doesn't overcorrect. You know, that when you yank it back, you don't overcorrect. And we've got to be very, very careful with that too. You know, I've got to check myself. I've got to check myself that I'm not getting stuck in some kind of rut. In the pursuit of yanking that pendulum back, I don't get too far over myself.
Very well said. Very well. I appreciate you saying that. I think it's a very good point because it's very easy to get carried away, especially when you see the pendulum swinging the other side. You got to bring it all the way back as quickly as possible because before it gets, you know, it gets even worse, and then without realizing it goes too far the other side. And I'm glad you said that. How much of a difference has X made to your fight and Elon's support as well?
Phenomenal. I mean, there were 300 million users on X when Dorsey sold it to Elon. I think they're 530 odd million now. And Elon has 225 million followers. So for Elon Musk to endorse Advance UK, which delighted me, and I'm sure every member of Advance UK and many others in this country, was a terrific step forward for my party.
What were I remember you told the story that you guys spoke a while ago. He was encouraging you to launch Advance UK. And back then you didn't think it was a good idea. And then that changed later on. What led to that change? And do you worry that this could, the Labour Party could benefit from that split between you and Nigel?
So Elon Musk is 100% right about Nigel Farage. And I hope people can see that Farage is actually not the answer. Farage is what I would call a political expedient. He's a cunning fox. He doesn't have courage. He doesn't have a political philosophy, Mario. He wouldn't be able to understand the problems, let alone provide the solutions. And I can give you lots and lots of examples of that. And so the existence of Advance UK is absolutely necessary because you need a political force in the United Kingdom, which will identify bravely the problems, reveal what the problems are, and simultaneously provide solutions. Reform UK under Farage is never going to do that. So Advance UK was always, in my mind, necessary. The minute Farage came back, frankly, and refused to democratize Reform, I don't know if you followed all of this, perhaps your audience hasn't followed it, but Reform UK as a political party is basically controlled by Nigel Farage, one man. And you can't, in my mind, stand for democracy, stand for the country, stand for a better way of governance if you own your party, if you control your party. So I was deputy leader of Reform, and I fought a campaign against Nigel Farage to democratize the party. And he claims he's done it, but he hasn't done it. And and I knew when he came back, it's going to be really difficult with him, and that a new political force is almost certainly going to be needed. But to launch a political party in the United Kingdom is very, very difficult, because a bit like the US, which is, Republican or Democrat, we are either Labour or Conservative. Um, and so when Elon Musk, rightly in my mind, identified that Farage is not the man, he naturally, in the one conversation I've had with him, and I completely agree with him, said, you need a new political force in the United Kingdom. You should start a new party. And I said, well, it's very difficult because the practical difficulties associated with it. But then Reform sacked a friend of mine who was a former colleague, a chap called Rupert Lowe, and they didn't just sack him from the party. They then used lawfare to effectively try and get him imprisoned. Trumped up charges were made against him about threatening violence. Police complaints were made, and he had his shotguns confiscated. He had the police turning up at his home late at night. Really awful things that Farage and his colleagues did to Rupert Lowe. At that point, I thought, right, no matter how difficult the task is of establishing a new party, we've got to do it, because you cannot have this kind of behavior from someone that might one day be the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Well, I think it was the 6th or 7th of March, I made the decision that we've got to launch a new party. And I mentioned it to Elon straight away. I said, I stand corrected. I DM'd him, on X. And I said, I know I said to you earlier that we can't do a new party in the UK. I'm correcting myself. No matter how difficult it is, we now have to launch a new party in the UK.
And Elon is he's loyal more to his values than people, which I respect so much. Like, he has certain values. He doesn't benefit from taking the positions like supporting IFD in Germany and supporting
No.
Advanced UK. One thing I've seen is that he makes those decisions at his own detriment. Obviously, we've seen that in the US with what happened with Trump, which is something I respect massively, because if someone that sticks by their values, is very rare to find today. But I do want to ask you, when it comes to British politics, um, but couldn't that backfire on the cause? Because a lot of your causes do overlap with Nigel's. You guys believe in a lot of the same things, while you denote
No.
others. Don't you agree more with Nigel? But don't you agree more with Nigel, let us say, the Labour Party?
I think Nigel Farage would be deeply, deeply damaging to our cause, because if he ever, the persona of Nigel Farage, what people think of Nigel Farage is that he's pro-British. He wears Union flag socks, and he looks and he feels, he talks about immigration, but he doesn't have a political philosophy. If you examine him not all that closely, just follow him a little bit, he says one thing one day and another the next. So, for example, he would bang on about immigration and how we've got to stop illegal immigrants, but he will not. He refused. Last year, he said it's impossible to deport all illegal migrants. You can't do it. And then he was asked, would you have an ambition to do that? And he said no. And then 3 days ago, 4 days ago, he said, we will deport all illegal migrants. He held a press conference. He said, we're going to deport all illegal migrants. Last year, he said it's impossible. This year, he said he's going to do it. Then the next day, he was asked, would that include women and children? And he said, no, it wouldn't include women and children. And then a few hours later, he backtracked on that position. He says things like, he's concerned about the cultural damage being done to the United Kingdom, but he's not worried about the demographic change that's taking place. He talks about the need to ditch diversity, equity, and inclusion, this protective blanket that I talked about earlier, that is put around ethnic minorities, minority religious beliefs, and so on, transgender ideology. He says we've got to get rid of that, but then he accepts that men who self-identify as women should be allowed to go into women's prisons as long as they've had the surgery. He's at odds with himself. He doesn't have a philosophy. And the reason I say he'd be deeply damaging for the country and the movement is he would get into office and everyone would think, right, you've got a pro-British Prime Minister now. You lot who were banging the drum for a pro-British Prime Minister have got what you want. And now be happy. And actually what he will do is great damage to the country. He will pass policies which are deeply damaging to this country. And then everyone will say, well, that didn't work, did it? You lot who argue for a pro-British stance, enforcing borders, bringing power back to our national parliament, etc., you lot are wrong. The global liberal order is the right way forward. And so he would trash our narrative. And so I think he's deeply dangerous.
Last thing I want to ask you, Ben, is whenever I interview someone, I get different perspectives before the interview to try to understand their position. Obviously, a lot of people would criticize you. And they'd label it as an extremist. I'm like, all right, cool. I used to believe that term a few years ago. Now, whenever someone says it, I start to question, like, why are they an extremist? Because when the people start to explain it, they have no real explanation. And they can disagree with some of your positions, but putting you in that labels, I hate labels, despise labels. Now, one thing they always like to say is something you said that I think was unfair. So I'll give you my opinion on it, and I want you to tell me exactly what you said, the context of it, and what you meant by it. Because I hate when someone says something, it's taken out of context. Then they clarify, because when someone says something, they know what they meant.
Yeah.
Other people don't know what you meant. You know what you meant. So when you then explain what you meant by it, they're like, no, that's not what you meant. But I made that statement. You know what I mean? And there was a statement you said that was taken out of context. Like, can you explain the statement about stabbing a boat and it sinks? Can you explain what the exact statement was, the context of it, and then what you meant by it? And I want you also to explain the critique that's made so people understand the other side, what they're saying.
Sure. So I think it was the 23rd of April, 2024. I was being interviewed by a lady called Julia Hartley-Brewer on Talk Radio. So if anyone wants to go and watch the actual clip, they can go to Talk Radio, 23rd of April, 2024. And I was saying that we've got to stop the dinghy. We've got a problem with dinghies leaving France with lots of illegal migrants on board, coming, mostly young men, coming to the United Kingdom. And our border force meets them at the point that our territorial waters join France's, at the point of our border effectively with France. Our border force meets them in boats, puts them on these, and then brings them back to the United Kingdom. And the argument that border force makes is that these people's lives are in danger. They're in dinghies in the sea, and we've got to bring them back to the United Kingdom. Once they're back to the United Kingdom, it's no longer a problem of border enforcement. It becomes a problem of deportation. Deportation is a much harder thing to do than actually stopping people coming into your country in the first place. So my principal argument is that you've got to intercept these dinghies in the sea, in the English Channel, and require them to go back to France. It's a 25-mile journey from France to the UK. If they can come 12.5 miles to our territorial waters, they can go back 12.5 miles to France. And I said that to Julia Hartley-Brewer. I said, we've got to, instead of focusing on deportation, we've just got to stop people crossing into our territorial waters. We need a dedicated force with speedboats, sensors, drones, barriers that intercept these dinghies and say, go back to France. And she said, well, what if when you intercept one of these dinghies with your new militia or whatever you want to call them, this dedicated force that's going to stop these dinghies, what if someone on the dinghy pulls out a knife and stabs the dinghy and they all go into the North Sea? Would you let them drown? And I said, no, I'd give them another dinghy, that you could have another dinghy in tow, put them in that dinghy and send them back to France. And she said, what if they stab that dinghy and they all end up in the North Sea again? And I said to her, and this was the stupid part of the debate where I allowed myself to get caught. I said to her, well, at some point, you've got to stop infantilizing people and allow them to suffer the consequences of their own decision. If they keep stabbing the dinghies that are given to them and they keep wanting to go into the North Sea, then it's up to them. That's the decision they've made. And I did later on in the interview go on to say that actually you could go on giving them boat after boat. You could even handcuff them and put them in a boat and send them back to France. But the point is, they should not be allowed to enter our territorial water. And what the media cottoned on to, and what the media absolutely have got their little hooks into, because even you've heard it, is Ben Habib said, let them drown. I didn't say let them drown. I said, if they keep stabbing their boat, look, they made the decision. They were safe in France. They made the decision to go on an unsafe craft to try and make the journey to the United Kingdom. They didn't use a safe route like an aeroplane or whatever. And then, having been intercepted and invited to go back to their point of embarkation, they stabbed their own dinghy, and they did it twice. And I made the mistake of saying, they've got to, they can't be infantilized. They've got to take the consequence.
To understand your position, if they keep stabbing it, would you at any stage let them drown, or would you always try to find a solution to get them back to where they came from?
So that was a live interview. Okay. The reality is there's one guy stabbing the boat, and there are probably 40 or 50 innocent people who are put at risk. Those 40 or 50 people absolutely deserve to be rescued. And I did propose that in the interview, give them another dinghy. But what if that gets stabbed? And I got irritated with the line of questioning because it was so hypothetical, so stupid. But by the way, these people are not suicidal maniacs. They're coming to the United Kingdom for a better life. If intercepted by a proper militia, and militia is not the right word, but you know what I mean, a proper trained force.
Focus on that, exactly.
Yeah, they would go back to France. And there's empirical evidence for what I'm saying. The Belgians have developed precisely this kind of force that intercepts dinghies that have left Belgian shores and doesn't allow them to come to the United Kingdom and sends them back to Belgium. And they've had no incidents of people drowning. They've sent them back. And the other point I should have made to Julia, and I'll make it now, is the safest way, the safest thing for these people is for them to know that they will never be allowed into the United Kingdom. Because once they know that, they'll stop making that dangerous journey. You've got to stop. You've got to prevent people from doing it. Every time someone gets in a dinghy from France to the UK, they actually risk drowning. People do drown, even without being intercepted, because their dinghies are not safe. Are you with me? So the safest thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to allow you to kind of make your position clear so people stop using it as an aha moment, because it is an annoying thing to, if your position you want them to drown, you could just say it, but obviously your position is not that. One last question I wasn't meaning to ask, I was trying to wrap up, but I just remembered while you were speaking, when the Syrian civil war started, all these migrants go to Europe. I went to Serbia, and I'm a very empathetic person. So I went to Serbia back then on a trip. I think I went across Europe. And I remember in Serbia, there was just so many of them intense. There's just very kind people trying to look for a better future, especially when you have a country like Syria destroyed by civil war, and you can start blaming the US and their foreign policy. It's a whole different discussion. On a personal level, when I ask you about those people, because a human's a human. Now, your focus is British citizens when it comes to your position as the leader of the Advanced Party, and if you do become prime minister. But as a person, when you look at humans like that, when I got it was just heartbreaking for men to ended up spending hours just giving them food and stuff. When you look at those people trying to find look for a better future for their kids, and sacrifice themselves to save their kids, and you see those heartbreaking stories where a mum would die and just wants to save her baby. I know, one side of me is when looking at someone in your position is like, hey, this is not your problem. Your British citizens vote for you to put the UK first. You can't help everyone. It goes back to suicidal empathy. But is there a personal side of you that looks at those people and is like, I was an immigrant, as in yourself and myself?
Yeah. So
empathize with them as well?
yeah, but I don't see myself as an immigrant, by the way, because my mum's English. I've always had a British passport. I mean, we can debate that. I was born in Pakistan. I came here. Some people say I'm an immigrant. When I go back to Pakistan, people say I'm a foreigner because I look and feel and behave and speak like an English.
I'm exactly in the same position, so I can relate to it.
Yeah, so I'm an immigrant wherever I go, I suppose, maybe. I mean, I feel completely British, but of course, I have feeling for people in Syria. And I think you said you didn't want to discuss the causes of the Syrian conflict, but I think the West is complicit in destroying large swathes of the Middle East. And I'm really, really upset with what we did in Iraq in 2003. Very upset with the Arab Spring, the support that we gave for the removal of Gaddafi. We nearly turned Egypt into a basket case of a state. Thank God we got a grip of the Muslim Brotherhood, or General Sisi got a grip of them. Syria, as awful as Assad was, let me tell you, he was better than anything that came during the period that they tried to get rid of him. And he's better than the Al-Qaeda guy they've got now. Macron and Starmer I can't remember the guy's name, but they've got a former Al-Qaeda member now running Syria, and Macron.
Al-Shara.
Yeah. And Macron, the president of France, is trying to befriend this guy. He's a terrorist. So I hold the West squarely responsible for many bad interventions in the Middle East, including Afghanistan. I mean, Afghanistan is the worst. 22 years of occupation, and we left it in a worse position than when we first went in. So we have got issues with the way we've perpetrated our foreign policy. But the way to correct our errors is not to import all the people back to our country. It's to go out and now invest in those countries. We had no vision in Afghanistan. Why the hell over 22 years? Why didn't we educate them? Why didn't we build schools? Why didn't we bring them our way of life? We made no effort to do that. We just saw it as a military mission. We were not winning hearts and minds and converting. I talked about the British Empire in glowing terms earlier. One of the reasons the British Empire did so well is because when it went abroad, it didn't subjugate. There were difficult periods, and there were confrontations, no doubt. But the modus operandi was not subjugation. The modus operandi was enrichment, dealing locally, empowering locals to start their own businesses, to enrich themselves, trade, etc. Why didn't we do that in Afghanistan? Why did we think we needed to get rid of Saddam Hussein? Why did we need to? The country was stable. We created a basket case. So I think we do have an obligation, having gone in and intervened in those countries, to rebuild those countries. But that's different, and they're not synonymous with bringing people back from there to here.
Ben, it was an incredible conversation. Went a lot longer than I expected. It was an absolute pleasure to meet you. There's so much more we could
Pleasure to
discuss.
meet you, Mary.
Would have been good to have a debate about the history of the British Empire. Also talk further about immigration. I didn't know we can have such an interesting discussion when it comes to foreign policy. So it was a nice response from you.
Thank you.
Makes for a good secondary conversation. But I really appreciate your time, sir, and hope to have another one again.
No, thank you, Mary. Thank you for having me on. Great pleasure.